Yes, what up, potty people, and welcome back to Clipped. I want to talk about if I were starting a podcast in 2024, the things that I would do. These are things that I've learned over my journey the last year and a half. So if you're going to start a podcast, I want to tell you what I would do and give you some advice on the things I did wrong and the things I've learned to kind of help you plan your roadmap and to help you kind of get your ducks in a row for the show that you're planning on launching. The first one, prepping takes a long time. I used to prep a lot in the beginning and then I kind of stopped a little bit because I thought I could wing it. But hear me out. The more prep you put in, the more smooth your recording and your post-production is going to be. Prepping is also can be boring or can be a little challenging, or it's something you tend to put off, or I tend to put off at least. And so keep in mind, if you're starting a podcast in 2024, the more you prep for your guest, if you're doing an interview or if it's solo, the more you prep your notes, whether you write out a full script or do bullet points, it's going to take longer than you think, but that's all with good effort because it's going to make your recording smoother. There's going to be less starts and stops and less editing. So prep. It takes a while, but you're going to be glad you did it. Number 2 is to try not to interrupt your guest. So if I were starting a podcast, I would make sure I kind of practiced this early on. So my brain moves fast. If you're the type of person where your brain moves quick and you're always thinking, try not to do a whole lot of or interrupt them. Even if you have a good point that you want to make or piggyback on something that they say, wait till they're done talking. It takes practice. So if I were starting a podcast, I would make sure that when I'm interviewing someone, I let them have the floor. The reason you're having them on your show is to highlight them and get their insights out to your audience. So try not to interrupt them. I mean, once in a while, if it's natural and depending on the flow of the show and the conversation and who you're talking to, that may happen naturally. But I think you're going to want to work on not interrupting your guest. If that's something you think that you'll have a problem with, take note of that. And also because a lot of times myself, I'm listening just so that I can respond rather than like listening to wait till they're done and then add to what they're saying instead of just like waiting to get my voice out or ask my next question. When you learn to listen, the show's going to develop, that specific episode's going to develop more naturally, and you might go somewhere that you didn't think you were going to go. And that, I think, makes the conversation gives it more range, and I think your guests will thank you for that. The next is that if you're about to start, be aware that it takes a long time to get comfortable and find your voice on the microphone. I want to say it took me at least 50, 60 episodes, and even now still, to get comfortable with the way I talk, the way I look on camera, the way I feel when I'm on the microphone, not trying to put something on, but also trying to be energetic. I'm more of a low-key person. So I also realized that when I think I'm ramping up the energy, when I listen or watch back, it doesn't really reflect that. So I really need to amp up the energy to show you, to just project myself and my message and what I want to talk about. It might be the opposite for you. Maybe you're super high energy and you need to tone it down. But the bottom line is it takes a long time to get comfortable. So don't give up if you feel uncomfortable or you don't like how you sound or look. It's going to take a while to find your voice. For me, 50, 60 episodes. For you, it may be quicker, it may be longer, but just know that it's constantly a work in progress, and it's likely that you're not going to like how you sound in the beginning. The next is using ChatGPT. I love AI and it's helped me a lot and it's sped up a lot of my workflow. But I will say that overuse of it has made me kind of more reliant on it. Now when I'm writing something, I'll pause and be like, wait, should I just put this into ChatGPT? Or it's I almost feel sometimes I don't have a mind of my own because I've been becoming too reliant on this AI stuff. So keep that in mind. It can help you, but if you're thinking you're going to use it all the time for everything, you might want to take a step back and hone whether it's your writing skills. For me, that's what I use mostly ChatGPT for, or maybe it's your editing. I know Podcastle and Descript and AI speech enhancement, and there's all these things that can help your workflow, but don't come too reliant on it. Learn your craft, hone your editing, your writing, everything, and I think once you kind of have that down, then just use AI as like a tool that helps you with your craft, not like where it becomes your craft. Okay, now if I was starting a podcast in 2024 and this is a video podcast, I would focus a lot of time on lighting. I mean, for camera, you could just use your iPhone. Honestly, that's what I'm using right now. I do plan to get a camera this year, but dude, lighting is key, and it's hard to get good lighting. Same with the room you're in, choosing the right background and the right colors. I'm still working out lighting, guys. You could probably see from video to video, it's slightly different. That's because I don't completely know what I'm doing with lighting. And so if I were starting a podcast and it was going to be a video podcast, I think lighting is almost more important than camera choice. So keep that in mind. It's going to take a while to figure out your shot, whether you use a ring light or a key light or like a 3-point lighting system, whatever. That's like a thing that's popular that I'm just learning about. It's going to take a lot of time to get it right. And yes, you can just throw up a ring light on your desk. And if that looks pretty good, then that's great. But as you grow, you're going to want to experiment with more, and it takes time. And so with everything in this podcasting and content world, be patient. The next thing I would do regarding guests is to change my mindset around booking guests, because I've found, and this is just personal, and this might work for you. So, is that most guests, even if they kind of seem like they're bigger than you or out of your league, a lot of the people you reach out to will say yes, and they will come on your podcast. Now, if you're just starting, maybe you want to wait a few months, 6 months, whatever the window is for you that feels right before you like feel comfortable reaching out to some of these guests that that you've put on a pedestal in your mind. Honestly, a lot of guests will say yes, even if it's a smaller show. Even if your show is small. So because they want to get their message out to a new audience, even if it's a small audience. Hey, like 50 or 100 listeners or viewers, that's a lot of people for somebody to speak to and for people to hear for the first time. And so if you have a mindset right now of like, it's going to be hard to book the right guests, or I want to get a certain caliber of guests, I would say that make sure you're comfortable, make sure your show's in a good flow, and you're on the rise and you're feeling good. You're getting good feedback about what you're putting out, and you're professional. Reach out to some of those people. I would, and I think you'd be surprised at how many of them will say yes. So if you're starting an interview-based show in 2024, don't think that you can't get good quality guests, because chances are more will say yes than you think. All right, this is number 7. If I was starting a podcast in 2024, what would I do? I would plan. And this is kind of like the first thing where I said prep. It's not easy to come up with new ideas and interview questions for people week to week. And so I would just know going into it that it's a long journey. It's a grind. And if you want a good show, a professional show, you're going to have to come up with new ideas, or once, you're a year and 6 months in, revisiting some of the older ideas and putting a new spin on them. Or if you've changed your mindset or some opinions about some of the things you talked about previously, that's a good way to come up with new ideas. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's not easy. And so don't think it's going to be easy to come up with new ideas or new questions week to week. It's not like super difficult. Like, it's not that you can't do it. It's a time thing. So, because I think people think podcasting, it's like so easy, or it's not going to take a lot of time, especially maybe if you're just doing audio and you can sit down. But I think the longer you go on, like this is episode 88, I believe, I think it actually becomes more difficult because you feel like you already covered stuff. I can't even imagine people with several hundred or 1,000 episodes, how to keep coming up with content and keeping the show engaging. If you're in this for the long game, just know it's harder than you think. Okay, number 8, if I was starting a podcast, I would make sure I get far ahead on my production schedule definitely before I launch. And then as time goes on, I would make sure there's always like a couple weeks worth of episodes in the can. To be completely honest, I used to be like a month ahead or at least 3 weeks ahead with episodes, but life happens. I'm a father, responsibilities, and I run my production company, the Podcast Haven, and that takes time. And I've found that as time has gone on, I have gotten further behind, and oftentimes I'm week to week. I'm recording this on a Monday, and this is going to go live on Wednesday. So that's an example of what not to do unless you have the chops to like edit quickly. and the confidence and like the lack of stress that you can pull it off in 2 days. Like me, it is still stressful, but you get what I'm saying. Don't do that to yourself. If I were starting a new podcast, I would make sure I get a lot further ahead with production than I am right now. That way, if you can't record one week for whatever reason, you've got something ready to go, and it just eases the stress for yourself. All right, number 9. If I were starting a podcast in 2024, I would say that get involved in your podcast community. Community is key, and I put it off for so long. Go to conferences, connect with people on LinkedIn. There's tons of local meetups. I'm going to put a link to some of the podcast groups that I'm a part of in the show notes, so you can click on those and you can join them. It's all about supporting each other. There's live events. There's some groups where you can like put a link to your episode. And you can do like rating and review swaps where, they listen to your episode, they rate it, you listen to theirs. And there's tons of groups out there. And I would say that the podcast community is like one of the most supportive communities I've been in. So I would say get involved in community early. It's going to help you grow your show, and it's going to help you like overcome some things or just learn things that you don't know what you don't know, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And there's people there that can help you. And if you have questions, they've got answers. If there's weird things about hosting your episode or downloads or analytics or production and editing, there's people in these groups that can help you with that. There's gonna be new people that are like a level below you, people at your level, and people above you. And getting involved in these communities, it's going to help you avoid pitfalls, and it's also going to help you learn from your lack of experience and also celebrate your wins. I mean, that's a big part of it too, is the support and people rooting each other on. All right, number 10. I've learned that I tend to ramble sometimes in interviews, and I tend to even ramble here in like solo episodes. And so I would say if I were starting a podcast and I was new to this, I would focus a lot on editing. You're going to want to take some of that stuff out, not all of it. You're going to want to leave some of it in so that it sounds natural. But I think it's like get to the point, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Don't go on too many tangents. If you find yourself stuttering or verbal tics or ums or ahs, or even on your guest side, I would say editing is your friend. And I don't think you can edit enough as long as it's tastefully, and keep your episodes shorter than you think they should. If you recorded for 45 minutes, chop it down to 40 minutes, 38 minutes, clean up some of that stuff, and that will naturally cut the episode, like that filler stuff. And I think cutting all that is your friend. And again, you have to do it tastefully and the right mix of like tangents or small talk or like fillers. So that's important so that it sounds naturally, but you're going to want to cut quite a bit of that, in my opinion. So if I was starting a podcast, I would realize that if the recording didn't go as well as I thought it could, cut. That's my philosophy. 2 more. Number 11, I've learned that social media followers and reel views and shorts and TikToks and all that, none of that translates into podcast growth. I think you want to be out there, you want to get your face out there, talk about the things that you talk about on your show. You don't necessarily want to talk about your podcast specifically, but you want to position yourself as an expert. And I think that helps with branding. And I think all those social media clips and videos, I think it helps grow your social media. But in my experience and a lot of the clients I work with, it doesn't translate to podcast downloads for several reasons. One, because social media consumers aren't necessarily podcast listeners. And the journey to take somebody from like a reel to then go to the link in your bio, click on like the Apple Podcast link, then go, the Apple Podcast app or Spotify, whatever it is, opens up, and then they follow the show. It's a big leap for the audience to take. And so I found that it very rarely translates to podcast downloads, which is a big part of podcast growth. However, you still got to do it. It's part of building your brand and getting your name out there, but don't rely on that to grow your podcast. To grow your podcast, you're going to want to advertise on other shows. You're going to want to do podcast swaps with other shows that are in your niche. You're going to want to be a guest on other shows. You're going to want to fine-tune your growth strategy to implement within the podcast ecosystem, not necessarily social media. When you start to promote yourself amongst other podcasters and podcast listeners. That's where you're going to see your show grow. And lastly, number 12, this was 12 steps that if I was starting a podcast in 2024, things that I would do and things that hopefully help you and things for you to avoid. I've probably said that a million fucking times. If I were starting it, it's funny. I used to want to be a teacher, and I've done a lot of like a substitute teacher of years ago. My early 20s, ran like after school programs. I've worked with a lot of like K through 12. It's been a while, but I did do it for several years in my early 20s. So that's why I repeat myself a lot, because they say you have to hear it. I think it's 7 times, 3 times or 7 times. I don't know, before it sticks. But I've learned that my voice, well, I knew this because I was an audio engineer, but you might learn this, is that your voice will sound different on different mics. And just because the mic is like more expensive doesn't mean that you'll necessarily like it the best on your voice. For instance, this is the Shure MV7, and I have it plugged in via XLR, not USB. But when I plug it in via USB, I think it actually sounds better. I don't know why. I should probably put it in via USB, but I have like my whole setup here, and that's a whole other conversation for another day. But I've learned that these combo mics, USB and XLR, which a lot of them are these days, a lot of the new manufacturers coming out with mics give you the option for both built into one mic. I'm going to say too, on the Audio-Technica ATR 2100, which is another mic I love, and the Samsung Q2U, and this Shure MV7, they all sound better plugged in via USB. So keep that in mind. The mic you bought might not necessarily be the right mic for your voice, and I realize budget constraints and all that, you can't just like go buy a million mics to try. Or maybe you can, and if you can, buy a couple and test them out. But all that to say is that you may have to get a different mic if you don't like the way you sound. Test them out, play with it. If you don't have the ears for it, ask people, in these communities, ask what they think, ask your friends, your family, your listeners, how they feel about your sound. For instance, I tend to get close with this, and it kind of like blows out the capsule a little bit. In any case, so that's it, guys. If I were starting a podcast in 2024, these are some of the things I would implement. These are some of the things that I've learned, and hopefully this provides some insights on like what you're going to be getting into with your show, some of the things that take a lot longer than expected, some of the things that might be easier, or the mindset shifts around guests and growth. Maybe this will help you kind of determine where you stand on those things and just give you some insights on what to expect. You can learn from my mistakes and hopefully learn from my advice. Keep listening, keep engaging, and keep creating. I'm out.